Welcome to the Life After ECT podcast. Life After ECT is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of those harmed by ECT through advocacy, education, and research. You can learn more about what we do and how you can support our work by visiting lifeafterect.org. In today's episode, I'll be discussing some serious, lesser-known side effects of ECT, including ion channel dysfunction, potential links to neurodegenerative conditions like ALS, and cardiac complications many of us face as we age. We'll also explore the challenges these conditions create for those living with them, the lack of research, and what we can do about it. A disclaimer: I'm not a medical professional, and none of this should be taken as medical advice. I'm sharing my experience, observations, and available research on the topic. Electroconvulsive therapy affects far more than memory. In some cases, it can change how the body functions in ways that are difficult to recognize and even harder to manage. For people with complex health issues like mine, it can be nearly impossible to tell where one condition ends and the other begins. That line is blurry, and living in that gray area can become dangerous. I have mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS. It's a condition where part of the immune system overreacts to triggers most people tolerate, sometimes causing severe, even life-threatening reactions. In my case, this condition developed after years of untreated autoimmune illness that was misdiagnosed first as bipolar disorder and later as treatment-resistant depression. That path ultimately led to ECT instead of treatment for autoimmune disease. And over time, with this illness going untreated, it morphed into something much, much worse. What makes this more complicated is what's happening at a cellular level. Ion channels, the structures that allow cells to communicate, regulate everything from the nervous system to the heart to immune responses. Electrical exposure is known to disrupt these systems. Research on electrical injury shows that even exposures classified as, quote, low voltage can be associated with significant long-term neurological and psychological effects. But those kinds of long-term outcomes have barely been studied in ECT. So when you're trying to manage a condition like MCAS, but also have a history of electrical exposure, it becomes very difficult to understand what's driving your symptoms and what treatment is actually safe. And that's where things start to break down. First-line treatment for MCAS often includes antihistamines, but many of these medications also affect ion channels. For me, drugs that are supposed to help can instead trigger serious reactions, including tremors, seizure-like activity, and cardiac symptoms. Even epinephrine, a standard emergency treatment for anaphylaxis, seems to be more dangerous to me than the reactions themselves, so I don't carry EpiPens anymore. This means I can't rely on typical rescue medications. At one point, my neurologist told me I was allergic to Benadryl, one of the few medications I could tolerate, with the caveat, Benadryl in high doses does cause uncontrollable tremors. However, I have been able to manage these symptoms by dosing low and slow and supplementing potassium. My neurologist also advised me to just not go outside, which is no way to live. This is what instability at a cellular level can look like. Unpredictable reactions, loss of safe treatment options, and increasing risk over time. I'm sharing this because people need to understand that ECT doesn't just affect memory. It may have broader physiological effects that don't always show up right away, but can emerge and worsen over time. When systems that rely on stable signaling start to misfire, the consequences can be serious and are often poorly understood. And when we try to get help, we run into another wall. When the source of that electrical exposure is ECT, many physicians don't consider it relevant or don't even believe it can cause lasting physical harm. Electrical injury itself is not well understood. Many physicians don't consider ECT relevant to physical symptoms or don't even believe it can cause lasting physical harm. And that leaves patients navigating serious, sometimes life-threatening conditions without support. As for me, I've spent the last 6 years trying to survive these conditions. I was fortunate to find a doctor who correctly diagnosed and treated the autoimmune illness that had been missed for years due to psychiatric misdiagnosis. But understanding the broader effects hasn't come from the medical system. It's come from my own research and from others who shared what they've learned while dealing with similar ECT side effects. No one should have to rely on strangers from the internet for medical guidance, but that's the position many of us are in right now. There's very little long-term research on ECT beyond cognition and memory. The broader physiological effects are barely studied, even though there have been calls to do so. One risk I had no idea about, and honestly horrified me when I found out, is ALS. And it's not the only neurodegenerative concern. Around the same time I learned about that, I watched a friend slowly deteriorate and wind up in a wheelchair years after her last ECT treatment. She now lives with delayed electrical injuries myoneural disorder. I also read about a woman who died from a degenerative brain disease her son believes ECT was the cause. All of that hit me hard. After my last attempt to get help, years of fighting for referrals only to be told once more that ECT doesn't do that, and to walk away empty-handed with no referrals, no treatment, no guidance. I'd given up on doctors. But suddenly, I understood how much danger I was actually in, that symptoms I'd been managing alone could be signs of neurologic decline I was never told was a risk. Unable to get help from doctors cost me valuable time to try and get ahead of this. What do we know about this particular side effect? The UK's National Radiological Protection Board specifically flagged ECT as a factor worth investigating in ALS development in their 2001 report. And a US congressional hearing later proposed a registry to track long-term outcomes in people who have received ECT, TMS, or who have experienced electrical injury. That registry still hasn't been created. And I'm not alone in this. I hear from others dealing with progressive neurologic issues, severe instability, and in some cases, life-threatening complications. Some are now in wheelchairs, some on respirators. Something I've been able to avoid so far, but the risk is still there. There's so much we don't understand, including the potential long-term cardiac risks. I've regularly come across reports of people dying from heart complications, sometimes years after their last ECT treatment. And these aren't fringe concerns. They're recognized by ECT device makers themselves. The Somatics Timatron Regulatory Update from 2018 lists brain damage, stroke, coma, cardiac complications, motor dysfunction, and neurologic symptoms, some associated with neurodegenerative conditions, as known adverse events. Most patients are only told about headaches, muscle soreness, and temporary memory loss. Those of us living with these more serious side effects are left wondering what they mean and what we can do about them. This needs to change. Studying these outcomes matters. It benefits everyone who has undergone ECT in the past, and those who will have it in the future. Unfortunately, psychiatry seems to have been more focused on rebranding ECT as new and improved, rather than on fully investigating its long-term side effects. People who report side effects that don't fit the prevailing narrative often face skepticism or have their sanity questioned, a topic I cover in depth in my last podcast series. Links in the show notes. Even the owner of Mecta, the other major ECT device maker, has called people like me a, quote, fringe minority when we raise concerns about side effects that fall outside of the new and improved narrative. This makes it very hard for people like us to get appropriate care. One of the reasons I turned Life After ECT into a nonprofit was to support research into these long-term issues. To better understand these changes in my own life, I've had to read hundreds of ECT studies cover to cover. And a common theme in the ECT research literature I keep seeing over and over and over again is that more research is needed. But that call rarely gets followed up with in a way that produces tangible benefits from people who have undergone ECT. My goal for Life After ECT is to change that by supporting research that leads to real ways to diagnose and treat these side effects. Over the last few years, we've been working towards setting up a research project. This year, I will be applying for grants to fund it. If you're interested in participating in future research, there's a sign-up form in the show notes. The way it works is I'll send out an email when opportunities open up, and you can decide if it's something you want to be part of. Final thoughts. If you're dealing with unexplained medical instability after ECT, you're not alone. And if conventional explanations don't fully account for what you're experiencing, it may be worth looking at through the lens of electrical exposure. In closing, ECT has been in use for nearly a century now. In all that time, no one has seriously tried to solve these problems. And that's what we're going to change. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to the Life After ECT podcast. If you found this episode useful, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help more people find this information. Thank you.